Hello and welcome to Business 360. I'm Archana Solanki. Here are the headlines we're tracking this evening. Israel and Iran trade fire for the fourth day. A new wave of Iranian airstrikes target Tel Aviv and Haifa. More than 220 people have died due to Israeli strikes across Iran in the last 4 days. US President Trump hopes for a deal between Israel and Iran, even as he reiterates firm support of Tel Aviv. Reports suggest Trump rejected Israel's plan to kill Iran's supreme leader. India moves to relocate students studying in Iran's universities. 4 days since the devastating Air India plane crash, grieving families wait for bodies as DNA matching continues. 90 bodies identified so far. Mortal remains of former Gujarat Chief Minister Vijay Rupani, who was on the flight, returned to his family. Strong start to the week on Dalal Street. Sensex gains nearly 700 points. Nifty moves closer to 25,000. Bank stocks lead the rally. Oil prices remain firm with Brent crude trading above the $73 mark. GST Council likely to consider replacing compensation cess with a combination of health cess and a clean energy cess. Sources say group of ministers largely favour hiking the cess on cars and tobacco products to shore up revenue. 21 India-based companies awaiting licenses from China to import rare earth magnets. Times of India reports the number of companies awaiting clearance has doubled in the last 2 weeks. 4 people are dead and dozens injured after a bridge marked as unsafe collapses in Pune. Authorities end operations after rescuing 51 people. Opposition targets the state government, demands accountability. World leaders set to gather in Canada for the G7 summit amidst Middle East tensions and the Ukraine war. Prime Minister Modi holds bilateral talks with his counterpart in Cyprus before travelling to Canada for G7. Supreme Court advocates criticized the Enforcement Directorate for issuing summons to Arvind Datar in connection with legal opinion given to Rashmi Saluja in the Religare ESOP's case. The summons were withdrawn later. Advocates call the ED notice unwarranted, say it reflects a disturbing trend of executive overreach that threatens the legal profession. Heavy rain batters several districts in Maharashtra, where the department issues a red alert for Raigad and orange alert for Mumbai and adjoining districts of Thane and Palghar. 18 people have reportedly died in rain-related incidents in the state in the 24 hours, up to 11 this morning. The top story we are tracking this evening: the decades-long simmering conflict between Israel and Iran has now escalated into a full-blown war, with both Tel Aviv and Tehran training their ballistic weapons on each other. Iran launched a fresh wave of strikes attacking Tel Aviv and the port city of Haifa, killing at least 8 people. Tehran has said that it has no intention of yielding to international calls for de-escalation. Days after Israel's surprise attack on Iran's nuclear facilities triggered the worst confrontation between the long-standing enemies. As per Iran's health ministry, over 220 people, mostly civilians, have been killed in Israeli attacks against the country. At least 70 were women and children. The intelligence chief of Iran's Revolutionary Guard and 2 generals were killed in these attacks. Israeli defense minister has warned Iran that the residents will pay the price for Iran's deadly retaliatory strikes. Israeli authorities said that at least 14 people in the country, including children, were also killed in strikes over the weekend. Israel's military said it had hit more than 80 targets in Tehran since Saturday, including the defense ministry headquarters. The US embassy in Tel Aviv suffered minor damage from the force of Iranian missile strikes. The US ambassador to Israel confirmed that none of the staff suffered any injury. US President Donald Trump has said that he is hopeful that Israel and Iran can strike a deal. However, he has reiterated that his administration will continue its support for Israel.
Mr. President, can you give us a sense of what you're doing to try to de-escalate the situation between Iran and Israel?
Well, I hope there's going to be a deal. I think it's time for a deal, and we'll see what happens. But sometimes they have to fight it out, but we're going to see what happens. I think there's a good chance there'll be a deal.
The U.S. can continue to support Israel in its defense.
We do, yeah. Thank you very much.
The Iran-Israel conflict is set to be one of the top agenda items in the ongoing meeting of the G7 in Canada. NBC's Alice Barr is here with more on how the G7 is expected to address the escalating tensions in the region.
President Trump is going to be with top allies today at this G7 summit in Canada, and he arrived yesterday with a full plate of issues that he's bringing with him, domestic issues, and then, of course, a lot on the foreign stage to be looking at, with the expanding conflict between Israel and Iran front and center, no question. It comes amid these mounting concerns over a new round of attacks between the two major military powers. President Trump saying it's time for a deal to de-escalate, while adding, as you heard there, sometimes they have to fight it out. He promised to keep supporting Israel's defense, though Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is spelling out a little bit more of what that looks like, saying in a new interview that American pilots are helping shoot down drones headed toward Israel. Iran has threatened to strike American military targets if the U.S. continues that assistance to Israel. Lawmakers are calling that a red line, with many in both parties defending Israel's goal of destroying Iran's ability to make a nuclear weapon, while still calling to prioritize diplomacy. U.S. embassy offices are closed in Israel today as this high-stakes conflict grows. And you're right to note, this is going to be center stage at the G7 conference ongoing. Exactly how the top economies and the top allies that are gathered there figure out how to address this, and whether there's kind of a formal document or statement that comes out of it, certainly is something that we're going to be watching for as really the meetings get underway in earnest a little bit later today.
The Indian embassies in Tel Aviv and Tehran have issued advisories for Indian nationals in the region. Both the embassies have shared hotline numbers and asked the Indian nationals to stay vigilant. The Indian embassy in Iran has also advised Indians to avoid all unnecessary movements in the country. India's foreign ministry has confirmed that the Indian embassy in Iran also relocated some Indian students to safer locations within the country. Parents of some students stuck in Iran have said that they are awaiting for government to shift remaining students to safer areas.
अभी 12 बजे मेरी बात हुई मेरी बेटी से, मुश्किल से आधे मिनट बात हुई है। उसने बोला कि हमारी एम्बेसी वालों से मैसेज उन्होंने की थी कि हम आपको किसी सेफर जगह पर शिफ्ट करेंगे, आप रेडी रहिए, लेकिन अभी तक नहीं किया। तेहरान में से कुछ बच्चों को शिफ्ट किया गया है, और जो शाहिद बीएससी में पढ़ रहे हैं उनको कुछ को आर्मीनिया शिफ्ट किया गया है, लेकिन जो शिराज या और यूनिवर्सिटी में बच्चे हैं अभी उनको शिफ्ट नहीं किया गया है।
And staying with tensions in the Middle East, Israel has killed at least 60 Palestinians in the last 24 hours. Out of these, around 17 were killed after the military shot at people who were trying to seek help at aid sites in Gaza. Medics in the region said that another 10 other aid seekers were reportedly killed and more than 50 injured in southern Gaza. Well, it's been 4 days since the devastating Air India plane crash in Ahmedabad. A team from Boeing has arrived at the crash site. They will join a team of 10 officers from the U.S. National Transportation Safety Board and the Federal Aviation Administration. Both black boxes have been retrieved from the aircraft. Grieving families are waiting for the bodies of their loved ones as DNA matching continues. My colleague Madiha Mujawar joins us from outside the Ahmedabad Civil Hospital. Madiha, how many victims have been identified so far?
Well, outside the mortuary complex here in the Ahmedabad Civil Hospital in Gujarat, families continue to wait for their turn, continue to wait for the call from the hospital to come and collect the mortal remains of their loved ones who were on that ill-fated plane that tragically crashed on the 12th of June. As per medical authorities, over 90 DNA samples have matched and over 60 bodies have been released, one of which was former Chief Minister of Gujarat, Vijay Rupani. His mortal remains were handed over to his family in the afternoon. The coffin was covered in the Indian flag and Chief Minister Bhupen Patel paid his last respect. Hospital authorities are refusing to confirm a number on how many bodies have been recovered from the crash site and how many DNA samples have been collected so far. But what we know is many people continue to be missing. Rescue workers are even today discovering and pulling out body parts from the crash site. The DNA samples are as I said, the 90 DNA samples have matched. Besides the 241 passengers, there were many people present in the area during the plane crash. The hostel building is where many students were having their lunch. Then there were many people who were on their bikes, in their cars, walking in and around the hostel building. So there are many people who continue to be missing, and the final number on the death toll, the casualties, could be much, much higher. There were also 61 foreign nationals on that plane, and none of the family members have come to give their DNA samples so far. We've been told that they will arrive either this evening or tomorrow morning, but DNA samples of the foreign nationals have not been collected so far. And we also have to understand that the bodies were severely burned, so if the samples are not collected immediately, then the DNA testing process might even get more complicated. For now, these families are waiting for their turn to get into the ambulance and begin their most painful journey to spend time with the mortal remains of their loved ones.
Right. Thank you, Madiha, for these updates. Let's shift our focus to the day's market action now. Sensex and Nifty started the week on a strong note, clocking all-round gains today. The market regained Friday's losses with Nifty back above the 24,900 mark. Broader markets also saw sharp recovery from intraday lows, with Nifty mid-cap index gaining more than 1,000 points. 46 out of 50 stocks ended in the green, led by financials and Reliance Industries. Crude oil prices remained largely steady, holding on to gains from Friday as the Israel-Iran conflict increased concerns over oil exports from the Middle East. The latest strikes have stoked concerns about disruptions to the Strait of Hormuz, the strait through which 20% of the world's total oil needs pass. Meanwhile, gold prices surged to the fourth straight session to hit a near 2-month high. The fears of a wider regional conflict have given a boost to the demand for safe haven assets. India's wholesale price index declined to a 14-month low of 0.39% for the month of May. This is the third consecutive month of decline. The drop was primarily driven by sharp decrease in prices across key categories, including food, fuel, and primary articles. India's trade deficit for May 2025 narrowed to $21.88 billion from a 5-month high of $26.42 billion in April. This is also lower than the year-ago figure of $22.09 billion. Merchandise exports in May fell 2.2% on year to $39 billion, while imports fell 1.76%. The Commerce Ministry said that exports of electronic goods and pharma surged during the month. Commerce Ministry also says India is engaged with China on the import of rare earth magnets. China has restricted the exports for all countries, but some relaxations have been made for companies in the US and Europe. 21 India-based companies are awaiting licenses from China to import rare earth magnets. Times of India reports the number of companies awaiting clearance has doubled in the last 2 weeks. The shares of Tata Motors slipped in trade today after its British subsidiary Jaguar Land Rover trimmed its FY26 forecast. The company expects its margin to be between 5 and 7% for this fiscal. This is in comparison to the 8.5% margin it reported in the previous financial year. The company had reported a free cash flow of 1.5 billion euros in the previous financial year. However, it sees the number close to zero in the current financial year. The GST Council may reconsider replacing compensation cess with a combination of a health cess and a clean energy cess. Now, sources tell CNBC TV 18 that the group of ministers largely favor hiking the cess on cars and tobacco products to shore up revenue. A compensation cess is an additional levy on specific goods to compensate states for loss of revenue they are likely to have suffered when the GST regime came into existence. Now, Timsy Jaipuria is here with more. Timsy.
Well, the upcoming GST Council meeting could consider the proposal of replacing the current compensation cess with two new cesses, health cess and clean energy cess. That's what sources indicate, but this can happen only through the GOM process. The GOM on compensation cess, currently headed by MOS Finance Pankaj Chaudhary, is likely to have its final meeting, in which sources indicate that they are likely to come to a conclusion to proposing these two new cesses. Once this proposal is finally drafted by the GOM, it will go to the GST Council as a recommendation of the GOM, upon which the Council will deliberate and then decide whether this should be the roadmap ahead, because current compensation cess is ending on 31st March 2026. The goods on which this cess will be levied, that is the two new cesses which is being proposed, will remain the same: tobacco products, aerated drinks and cars. The overall incidence after replacing the current compensation cess with these two new cesses is also, sources say, might remain the same, because the government does not want to increase the tax incidence, because these are commonly used items and though considered as luxury or sin goods, but still overall tax incidence is likely to remain the same. Now, what happens? Because currently the law does not permit to introduce any new cess or any cess under the GST regime. Thus, there needs to be an amendment to bring any new cess or any cess under the GST regime via moving amendments in the Constitution Amendment Bill, which had paved the way for having a new indirect tax regime, that is GST, way back in 2017. So that needs to be amended to bring these two new cesses. Now, what is to be seen, whether government decides to chart this particular path or keep these two new cesses under the indirect tax regime, just like agriculture infra development cess or road and infra cess, which is separately accounted for and not under the GST. Something that we'll have to wait and watch for.
Right. Thank you, Timsy, for that. On that note, it's time for a short break. Coming up next, the Supreme Court advocates criticized the Enforcement Directorate for issuing summons to Arvind Datar in connection to legal opinion given to Rashmi Saluja and the Religare ESOP's case. More on that when we return. Welcome back. A quick look at other headlines. A 57-year-old man suspected of killing Democratic lawmaker Melissa Hotman and her husband in Minnesota has been detained by the police. The arrest followed 2 days of manhunt. As per the police, the suspect was armed at the time of his arrest in a rural area of Minneapolis, but gave himself up peacefully when challenged. The suspect is also alleged to have shot and wounded Democratic State Senator John Hoffman and his wife. Both are now in hospital. Prime Minister Narendra Modi finished his first official trip to Cyprus. This visit is the first ever visit by an Indian Prime Minister to the nation in 23 years. This is also Prime Minister Modi's first international trip since Operation Sindoor. He met the President of Cyprus, where both leaders discussed ways to boost ties in trade, energy and defence. Cyprus is set to hold the rotating presidency of the EU Council in 2026. India and the European Union have attempted to speed up negotiations for a free trade agreement. Government sources tell CNBC TV18 that the meeting is now being held on a monthly basis instead of every quarter. 5 more chapters of the deal have been finalized out of the total 23 chapters. Speaking at the India-Cyprus CEO Forum, Prime Minister Modi also said that India and the European bloc will finalize a trade deal by the end of this year.
पिछले महीने भारत और यूके के बीच एक एम्बिशियस एफटीए पर सहमति बनी है। अब हम भारत और यूके के बीच फ्री ट्रेड एग्रीमेंट को इस साल के अंत तक संपन्न करने के लिए प्रतिबद्ध है। इसकी नेगोशिएशन में गति आई है। इसका लाभ आप सब साथियों को अवश्य मिलेगा।
A helicopter carrying pilgrims from Kedarnath crashed yesterday, killing all 7 people on board. As per preliminary analysis, the aircraft went down due to bad weather in the Rudraprayag district of Uttarakhand. The tragedy was the 5th incident on the same route in 6 weeks. Uttarakhand Chief Minister Pushkar Singh Dhami called an urgent meeting and ordered full investigation into the matter. 4 people are dead and dozens have been injured after a bridge that was marked unsafe collapsed in Pune. The National Disaster Response Force have called off operations after rescuing 51 people. Officials have said that the iron structure collapsed after it was overcrowded by tourists who ignored the warning board at the spot. Heavy rain battered several districts in Maharashtra. The Met Department has issued a red alert for Raigad and orange alert for Mumbai and adjoining districts of Thane and Palghar. 18 people have reportedly died in rain-related incidents in the state in the 24 hours up to 11 this morning. A gas leak in a well of an ONGC plant in Assam's Shivsagar district has entered 4th day. Officials have said that 70 families have been shifted to a relief camp around the area. Company Director Vikram Saxena reached the spot on Saturday and a team led by him took operational control of the well. Reports have indicated that the well has not caught on fire yet and no one has been injured so far. The government has issued a notification that India's 16th census with caste enumeration will be conducted from the 1st of March in 2027. The census would be conducted in 2 phases. Phase 1 will be house listing operation, in which details of housing conditions and assets will be collected. Meanwhile, the second phase of population enumeration will involve the collection of socio-economic details. The Supreme Court advocates body has lodged its strong protest against the Enforcement Directorate for issuing summons to senior advocate Arvind Datar. The summons which have now been withdrawn are in relation to a legal opinion given by Datar in the ESOPs issued to Rashmi Saluja. The advocates have called the ED's move coercive and unwarranted. Ashmit Kumar joins us now with more. Ashmit, please take us through what the top court's advocates said.
Well, Arvind Datar, one of the senior most advocates in the country on all things related to tax and regulation, was in for a rude shock over the weekend when he received an ED summons to appear for questioning in case of the ESOPs that had been issued to Rashmi Saluja. The case in point, the ED's contention was that Arvind Datar, as a lawyer, had issued an opinion in favor of issuance of those ESOPs and therefore needed to be questioned. Now, in less than 24 hours, it was subsequently withdrawn. But nonetheless, this very act of summoning a lawyer for issuance of a legal opinion is something that's been widely condemned. In fact, a statement issued by an association of Supreme Court advocates went on to say that they fully condemn this move, that they fully they deplore this move that has been made by the Enforcement Directorate, going on to say that not only is it unwarranted, not only is it arbitrary, but it also impacts the rule of law. It's a case of it represents executive overreach, strong words being used there, going on to say that summoning a lawyer for discharge of a professional duty, which is to issue an opinion, is in fact a clear case of misuse of authority, or going on to say that such coercive measures in fact take away from the independence of the judiciary, hurt the judicial dispensation process, and something that should be discontinued, and that the ED's actions are coercive in nature, and that going ahead, it sends a chilling message to the entire legal community. So a strongly worded message being sent towards the Enforcement Directorate by some of the leading lawyers in the country.
All right, thank you, Ashmit, for that. India's G20 Sherpa Amitabh Kant has stepped down from his post, marking an end to his government service after 45 years. In a post on social media, Kant thanked Prime Minister Narendra Modi for the opportunity to serve as the country's G20 Sherpa and drive key developmental reforms. Kant will now engage with and support startups, think tanks and academic institutions in personal capacity. He has served as CEO of Nifty Above from 2016 to 2022. The 1980 batch IS officer also played an instrumental role in campaigns such as Startup India, Incredible India and Make in India. And with that's a wrap on this edition of Business 360. News and updates continue right here on CNBC TV 18.